welcome to today's session. My name is Ken Muranguri. I'm a verbal GMAT trainer with the Kenya IELTS program. So today we'll be looking at a topic in critical reasoning, which is logical flow. So these are some of the questions that you'll find in critical reasoning, where a scenario is presented and it has an argument or conclusion. So your task is to identify the logic gap or the flaw in the reasoning of that conclusion. So they're usually presented in a variety of ways. Either you can be asked to identify the flaw, or you can be asked to identify a solution to that flaw of reasoning. So these types of questions, they need an understanding of both the stimulus and the question choice. This means that understanding the stimulus is understanding the passage that you've been given, the passage where you have your scenario and your conclusion, and then also understanding the question choices. So, of course, this is reading every answer choice carefully and understanding how it affects these stimulus that you've been given. So what does this do? It determines whether solving the problem presented in the answer choice corrects the logical flaw presented. So once you understand both the stimulus and the question choice, you can now be able to relate to see whether solving this flaw that is in this question or answer choice will solve our logical flaw. So we look out for a couple of things when solving for logical flaw questions. So first of all, if the flaws presented are specific or general. So by specific, we mean if you are given a scenario, these flaws are specific to that scenario. But if it's general, you'll find something like the author has confused a cause for an effect or something of the sort. So these are general, and then the specific ones are just very specific to that scenario. So if correcting the flaw validates the argument or conclusion. So this means that if you are working on an answer choice, make sure that whatever flaw that is presented in this answer choice, solving for it actually validates the argument or validates the question, because some of the questions will be asking something like identify the flaw in the reasoning. So that means that you should look for an error to prove that this conclusion is false. So number 3, exact wording of the argument or conclusion, because sometimes the argument can be focusing on one thing or can be connecting two specific things. And then if you were to find a flaw, you'll find a flaw that connects these two things that the argument and or the conclusion did connect. So look out for the exact wording. And as we always say in critical reasoning, it is crucial to use the exact words of the author so that you don't end up choosing answer choices that are out of scope. So with that said, we can do one example. So go ahead and pause, then we'll do the question together.
You are watching Success with Bob Mwiti Show, presented to you by Upstack America. Upstack America is a consulting company that helps immigrants find amazing higher education and job opportunities in the tech industry in the United States. You can find our programs by going to www.upstackamerica.com. Upstack America, we wake you up to the unlimited potential.
So our question here says, so this year the New Hampshire division of Company X set a new record for annual sales by that division. And the record is especially surprising since that division has the smallest potential market and the lowest sales of any of company X's divisions. So we see here that there is a new record of sales by this New Hampshire division, and this is a record by that division. And then the record now is surprising because these sales, even if they broke the previous record, they are the lowest sales of any other division of that company. Which of the following identifies a flaw in the logical coherence of the statement above? Okay, so note that in the premise, we have our introduction of a record, and then in the argument, we have the introduction of the comparison of that division to other companies' division. So we will go to eliminate, and if you want to find the logical flow of this argument, you must connect these and these, or show a disconnect of the same. So A, if overall sales for company X are sharply reduced, then New Hampshire's division new sales record is irrelevant to the company's prosperity. So of course, we see an introduction of company's prosperity, and of course, introducing company prosperity, which hasn't been mentioned in our stimulus, can't possibly solve this flow of reasoning. So for that reason, you can eliminate A. Then B, since the division is competing against its own record, the comparison of its sales record with that of other divisions is irrelevant. So here we see that, remember, this new record is by that division, not by the entire company. So the record is for the division, so the division is competing against its own record. So it doesn't make sense to say that it's surprising while comparing those sales with other divisions, because a record, of course, it's a comparison of two similar things. So say annual sales last year or the previous years versus annual sales this year by that division. So the fact that it has low sales doesn't nullify that. It can actually increase the number of annual sales. So we can keep B. C, if this is the first year that the New Hampshire division has been last in sales among company X's divisions, the new record is not surprising at all. So again, we see that we begin to compare the record to the sales of company X's divisions. So we are again bringing in these other divisions to validate if this record is surprising or not. So we can eliminate C. D, if overall sales of company X were greater than usual, it is not surprising that the New Hampshire division was last in sales. So this doesn't have even anything to do with this record, which we are trying to solve for the reasoning flaw of comparing this record to other company X's division sales. So for that reason, D is out. E, since the New Hampshire division has the smallest potential market, it is not surprising that it had the lowest sales again. This focuses on the wrong things, so sales and small potential market, doesn't mention anything about the new record, so it doesn't possibly give us the flow that we are looking for. E is out, and we get our answer as B. So whenever you are doing a flow question, just ask yourself, where is it that I can find this flow? So as usual, when dealing with questions that have arguments and conclusion, know exactly what the conclusion is, and then the logic behind it, because you are finding a logical flow. Here is where you will find something that disconnects the logic from the conclusion. So let's do another example to see how a logical flow question can be presented. So just go ahead and pause and we'll discuss it. So our question reads, during the Second World War, about 375,000 civilians died in the US and about 408 members of United States Armed Forces died overseas. On the basis of those figures, it can be concluded that it was not much more dangerous to be overseas in the armed forces during the Second World War than it was to stay at home as a civilian. So from this, we can see our conclusion here. So it can be concluded that it was not much more dangerous to be overseas in the armed forces during the Second World War than it was to stay at home as a civilian. So we have our conclusion. So what's the logic behind it? So because during the war, 375,000 civilians died compared to 408,000 members of the army. So since these numbers are not so far apart, now the author concluded that it was not as dangerous, it was not any more dangerous to be in the army overseas than to be a civilian back home in the US. So our question reads, which of the following would reveal most clearly the absurdity of the conclusion drawn above? So this just means that the conclusion is flawed. So either why is the conclusion flawed? Because probably the logic that was used to infer this conclusion is also flawed. But what does the question want? It wants us to choose an answer that would reveal that this logic is flawed. So kind of like an experiment or something that could be done to prove that or to reveal that this conclusion is flawed. So we can go ahead to our answer choices. So A, counting deaths among members of the armed forces who served in the US in addition to deaths among members of the armed forces serving overseas. So here now we are kind of bringing into the picture the comparison between the members of the army in the US, so those who weren't overseas, and members of the armed forces who are serving overseas. But remember, this comparison is between being an armed forces in the armed forces overseas versus at home as a civilian. So of course we know that members of the armed forces who served in the United States were not civilians. So this isn't relevant to proving the flaw of that conclusion. A is out. B, expressing the difference between numbers of deaths among civilians and members of the armed forces as a percentage of the total number of deaths. So this just means finding the percentage, say, of civilian deaths. So 75k divided by 75k plus 4. So just finding that percentage. And even if you found that, say, because this is almost, say, 45% of the deaths were civilian versus 55% of deaths from the armed forces, it still wouldn't reveal any flaw in the conclusion. So for that reason, then I will eliminate B. C, separating deaths caused by accidents during service in the armed forces from deaths caused by combat injuries. Again, we are comparing deaths of United States Armed Forces members who are overseas versus civilians at home. So knowing the causes of the deaths of the armed forces members, won't really help in proving the flaw of the conclusion. D, comparing death rates per 1,000 members of each group rather than comparing total number of deaths. So here, each group means civilian or armed forces overseas. So if say we had civilians total number as 300 million and armed forces total number as 3 million, say we're assuming that these are the ones who are overseas. If you check the deaths per 1,000 members, so these deaths per 1,000 members of the civilian population versus these deaths per 1,000 members of the armed forces, you'll find that the death rate per 1,000 members of civilians is way lower. Actually, if it's this way, it's like 100 times lower than this rate for the armed forces. So these would prove now the absurdity that it was actually not more dangerous to be overseas than to be a civilian at home in the United States. So we can keep the E, comparing deaths caused by accidents in the US to deaths caused by combat in the armed forces. So again, now we are going to causes of these deaths, which isn't really helping us solve our logic flaw. So we can eliminate E. So understanding that this conclusion was derived from a logic that the numbers are just almost the same, you can now know how to think around that, know the real comparison, know that it's not just numbers that matter, but numbers or the rate of deaths per that population. So with that, we can get our answers. B. Yeah, so these two examples, they have revealed the different types of ways that a flaw question can be asked, and these are not the entirety of the framing of these flaw questions. So the main thing is understand the stimulus very well, understand, of course, the conclusion and how this conclusion was derived, so the logic behind this conclusion, then understand exactly what the question is asking so that you do not confuse finding a flaw to finding a method or an experiment that could reveal that flaw, as we've done in this example. And if you do that, you'll be able to handle flaw questions quite easily. So that was it for the lesson today, and I'll see you in our next lesson. Bye.